Many hands make a miracle. Let's all join hands together. Life on earth is so wonderful, and we will laugh and dance and struggle as friends, and all their dreams achieve their ends. Many hands make a miracle. People climbing together. Soon we reach to the pinnacle of every mountain peak we hazardous one. We lift our hands to welcome the sun. Many hands make a miracle. Let's all join hands together. Life on earth is so wonderful, when people laugh and dance and struggle as friends, then all their dreams achieve their ends. Many hands make a miracle. People climbing together. Soon we reach to the pinnacle of every mountain peak we hazardous one. We lift our hands to welcome the sun. We lift our hands to welcome the sun.
This reading is from Rays of the Same Light by Swami Kriyananda. This passage from the Gita, the title is, Can You Recall Your Distant Past? The passage is from the 4th chapter. The Blessed Lord said, Arjuna, you and I have passed through many births. I know all of them, though you, O chastiser of foes, recall them not. Arjuna, before whose mighty sword of discrimination the forces of delusion were in full flight, had yet to achieve final spiritual victory. He had not yet realized the indwelling divine self. Only in the state of perfect dispassion, of divine non-attachment to the present incarnation or to any previous incarnation, does the soul remember all its lives on earth as well as in the astral world. Krishna spoke of knowing all previous births rather than remembering them. To him, time itself existed always in the present tense. In his cosmic consciousness, moreover, he knew the past lives of all beings. His awareness was far more than memory, it was omniscience. In the above passage, we see that the importance of accepting the authority of enlightened souls rather than relying on human opinions to lead us to wisdom. Most intelligent of men is he who submits his intelligence to the guidance of wisdom, as embodied in a self-realized master. For truth can never be created, it can only be perceived. Arguments, even evidence in favor of reincarnation are often dismissed airily with the words, "Oh, but it doesn't necessarily follow." There have, for example, been numerous cases of children who seem to have been able to remember in detail certain experiences from their past lives. They supplied little-known bits of information that were subsequently verified. Some of them even remembered words from languages to which, in this lifetime, they had never been exposed. As often as such accounts appear, however, skeptics have dismissed them, saying, "Oh, but it doesn't necessarily follow that those were memories." The supposed recollections might have been suggested by something the children heard, or they may have been the result of telepathic influence. They might even be explainable by vaguer concepts, such as, quote, racial memory. Such alternatives seem considerably more far-fetched than the simple explanation that the child did, in fact, remember their former lives. The only imaginable advantage to these alternatives is that they absolve those who offer them from having to think any more about the subject. No doubt these people imagine that by ignoring their own spiritual bewilderment, it will never rise up again to haunt them. In fact, it may as well be admitted that virtually nothing necessarily follows from anything else, if one is sufficiently determined not to accept it. The validity of an argument depends not only on its internal logic, but also on a person's receptivity to it. If one doesn't want to accept it, he will produce so many counter-arguments that the central issue will end up getting buried in the dust of confusion. Logic is, at best, a vicarious approach to the truth. It touches only the intellect, but not one's actual state of awareness. Every issue, virtually, can be debated from different sides with a fair degree of intelligence, leaving the truth forever untouched. Experience, then, is the only definitive basis on which to judge reality. That is why Krishna's simple answer to Arjuna is so effective. Arjuna had questioned his teacher's claim to remember things he had done long before his present birth. Krishna offered no lengthy arguments in favor of reincarnation. He replied simply, "I know my past births, and I know also yours." The calm certainty of great masters in their spiritual wisdom is what lifts their teachings above the labored arguments of theologians. Unlike Arjuna, the chastiser of foes, a true master feels no need to do battle for truth. What he says is for our benefit, if we choose to listen. And if, as Jesus put it, we have ears to hear. Wise is the devotee who, when confronted with a new teachings, doesn't ask himself first, "What do I think of it?" but rather, "What have great masters said on the subject? What has the wisdom of the ages to say about it?" Thus, through the Bhagavad Gita, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
This is a very interesting reading. And very often in America, the way we approach this reading is to start talking about reincarnation and trying to give people reasons why they should believe in it. But we don't have to do that here. It's great. But what I will talk about is truth. And Swamiji is writing in this passage about how, the truth that we tune into is at various levels within ourselves. And of course, we start with the highest truth of God, and knowing that our goal is to reach God and be in alignment with God and Guru. We know this. But then, as truth becomes distilled down to the human level, then it can get a little clouded. It can get clouded by emotions. It can get clouded by ego. And so we have to ask, how can we tune into truth? And one of those ways is through our intuition. But again, it can be clouded. I wanted to read first from Whispers from Eternity, a nice poem that Master wrote. It's called "Blow Thy Music Through My Shattered Reed." If you're not familiar, some instruments you blow this way and they have little reeds that make noise. "Thou master piper, blow thy music through the reed of all religions, so often broken by sectarian selfishness, and bring forth thy one theme of truth. Dress that divine melody with the golden chords, showing the richness of thy spirit. And, O Master Piper, gather together from all the highways and byways of truth's numerous expressions, all the uncompleted songs of lonely hearts, seeking attunement with thee, and let them flow into complete melodies of joy through the love-playing flute of life. On my silence-tuned radio mind, I listen daily for thy thrilling, anciently familiar flute notes. I tried to tune into them, but thou seemst so far, far away, and at first the busy static of restlessness crackled in my silence. Then at last, however, with a few fine, careful touches of concentration, I heard a soft rustling sound, as if on wings of space. And suddenly I heard thee piping softly, then more loudly, and ever more loudly, with a swelling chorus of all God's goodness and the latent nobility in all hearts. So we are that devotee that keeps calling on God, asking to be attuned ever more deeply, to understand the truth ever more deeply within us. And I wanted to give a few examples, because developing intuition takes many, many years, probably lifetimes, lots of meditation, lots of caring about the truth versus opinion. And sometimes it's a little hard to shuffle through what is truth, what is opinion, what is my desire versus what does God want. All these things happen. Remember, ultimately, the only truth that truly matters is the God issue, the coming to God. But so often we get so attached to our opinions and our interpretation of the truth that it almost becomes like a life or death thing. And this is kind of where reincarnation does come into matter, because very often we will feel a life or death feeling about something other people might consider a trivial issue. Have you ever been in a situation where you're just feeling, no, I just know the right thing is this, and there's like a feeling of being threatened and, wait a minute, And when you meditate on it, it's like, now, why am I that upset about it? What is it that's resonating in me? Well, we have lifetimes after lifetime after lifetime of being murdered for saying the truth, of being murdered for being against the truth or for the truth or whatever it is. So there can be a lot of emotion involved in truth. Or it could be coming from childhood. Say we had an unfair parent that didn't care about what we thought. And so even if we were little kids saying, I know the truth, it didn't matter. It's like, shut up, you're a little kid. You don't know what you're talking about. My opinion's loudest, so be quiet. We've all had that too. Bosses can be that way too. Fellow employees. Children can be that way. Telling their mom what to do. We see that a lot. Look, the little boys that get everything they want, telling their mom to do. Well, they'll be married someday, and maybe that won't work out. But they can live in the fantasy world for a while. Over the years, I've had a lot of different experiences around intuition and have learned some good lessons. There was one situation about 15 years ago. I was living in the Palo Alto community, and Palo Alto Ananda community, for those of you who haven't heard about my living there before. And I was working in the Sangha office. So I did a lot of different jobs. I coordinated volunteers, I planned events, just a lot of different administrative things. I was in charge of the database. There were just a lot of things, and there were 5 of us in the office because it was such a large congregation. It took 5 people to help support that. So at one point, David and Asha said, let's look into getting a retreat. And so everyone thought, well, that sounds good. And they formed a committee of people who were going to do this. And I was not a part of that committee. In fact, I didn't think about even wanting to be a part of the committee. But this group of people, their job was to look around at the different properties and look into government regulations and city regulations and all these things, zoning, all this kind of stuff with the land. And I had been going off to the ocean on my day off, and I always passed by this retreat that one day said for sale. And I don't know, it was maybe 45 minutes away or so. And so one day I went in to it, and it was just like, wow. I mean, it had all the buildings you could want. It had all this stuff. And I meditated, and I just thought, this would be great. This would be a great retreat. This would be great. And I was just really enthusiastic, and I had meditated on it, and it felt like this should be the retreat. A lot of enthusiasm, passion, that kind of a thing. And so this was towards the end of, the search had been going on for over a year, and they just couldn't find things. So I brought it up as a suggestion, and it was looked at. But then also, like shortly after, the decision was made to, we're not going to be pursuing a retreat anymore right now. And I was like, what? I had the intuition that this would be a great retreat. Why don't we look at this retreat? And I wasn't like going to everyone and saying, hey, what do you think? What do you think? But inside myself, I was like, what's going on here? I had such an intuition about this retreat. And so I, just felt so passionately about it. And so at the time, I was, 15 years ago or 16 years ago, a lot younger, a lot more passionate, a lot less centered, a lot more emotional. And so that was my experience. And it turned out, I only found later, it was very difficult for me to let go of my opinion on this, And a little while later, I found out that they had actually been having a meeting with Swamiji. He had just come into town, and he hadn't really said much about it until that meeting. And then his comment at the meeting was, we need a retreat right now like we need a hole in our head. And so what had happened was, no one said, Swami, what do you think? Should we even be looking for a retreat? They, just decided, and that's fine. These things happen. But checking in. And so it was like, okay, there was my truth, and then what was Swami tuning into? I think Swami's right. Just like in the reading says, that, a master is going to be tuning into the truth. And, you may say, oh, well, Swamiji wasn't an avatar, he wasn't 100%. Well, fine, 99.99% is pretty good, too. And so, it was like, what was I tuning into? What was Swamiji tuning into? And we have to think about the timing related to our intuitions also. I have another example. At some point, this was more like 10 years ago. I had a meditation that Nayaswami's Haridas and Roma were going to move to Palo Alto. Now they were very close friends, and this was not something, I was probably desiring this on some deep subconscious level, but it wasn't something I thought about. Wherever we live, we always very often end up living apart in different places, and we are still connected, but it's not like, oh, I only wish you could live near me. There wasn't that. But I had this meditation, and it was like, whoa, they're going to move here. Wow. I better tell them. And, it was just like a very inspired feeling and a very uplifted feeling, and it felt like truth to me. So I heard shortly thereafter they were moving, but to a different community. And I said, Divine Mother, what is going on here? Why did I feel so strongly it was this community? Well, 1 year later, they moved to Palo Alto. So you see, timing has a lot to do with it. And guess what? For the retreat for Palo Alto, about 10 years later, they got the retreat. So we can tune in to what truth is trying to happen, but our emotions can block the whole truth. And we think we know the whole truth because we had such a strong feeling about it. But in actuality, we may not be taking into account the whole truth. And the whole truth matters in many ways. Swamiji said, truthfulness is always kind. And we've talked about this before, but it means when we are speaking the truth might be you're a real difficult person. But the whole truth might be, if I said that, one, it's hurtful. Two, it could burn bridges with that person. I may have to work with them someday. How are they, is that going to win them over so that they would want to work with me or trust me? What if we had to work in a situation where we needed to trust each other? That involves the whole truth, the whole aspect of the situation. And I remember Asha once said, because she's a passionate person too, so she learned a lot of these lessons long before me, and then she could see my passion coming through. And she said, truth does not have to be backed up by emotion. Sometimes in our families it'd be the person who yells the loudest, they get their way, that's their truth wins. But in Ananda, we all are striving for something else. We're striving to present the truth with calmness. That if we feel something's the truth, it doesn't have to be backed up with arguments and pushiness and I know this is the right way. Instead, when we feel those feelings around an intuition, we should back off and meditate. Because first of all, if this is the highest truth, the reality of God, where does our little opinion way down here count as life or death? Or, So there's a bigger reality that's happening. And we may not know all the details of a certain situation that allows us to know the whole truth. Like when I had that intuition about the retreat, I think I was intuiting that Palo Alto, it'd be great to have a retreat nearby, and that God did want that. But God wanted that in His timing. In fact, when they were doing the search, they kept coming up with roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. There was like, in this place, the zoning was wrong. In this place, the natural resources of the property were wrong. In this place, the neighbors wouldn't have wanted us there. And then ultimately it was decided, right now at this point, we don't even have enough people to kind of commit their lives to making it work. And sure, that commitment level that's required to make something work, you can't just snatch a new person and put them in that situation. Someone who hasn't matured spiritually and just throw them in that situation, it's not fair to them, it's not fair to the situation. So the resources weren't really there, and that was kind of part of when people were backing off of it, and then Swami said, last thing we need is that. So, I think very possibly if I want to give my intuition a slight amount of credit is like, okay, I was tuning into what all that whole committee and everyone else who thought it might be a nice idea, that yes, at some point Palo Alto could use a retreat. And when they did finally get the retreat, it was like the timing was so right. The right property came, it had all the things they needed on it, all the different details worked out and boom, they had it. It wasn't like, we really struggled and we fought the city and, it was like God guided every step. And that's the other thing about intuition is as we get an intuition, the intuition might say, go straight ahead. And so we walk straight ahead. But Swamiji said, check in. Is it time to turn left or right yet? Swamiji could switch directions in a second. If his intuition, if Master was telling him, no, you've gone that far, now it's time to turn left, now it's time to turn right. Rather than, I will not give up, I will pursue this one intuition completely to the end. And it's like, but wait a minute, see how that emotional energy could make someone blindly just keep going and going and going without getting their center back and meditating and say, today, do you want me to do that also? You know, you can really see how that can do it. And that's kind of how we are in our lives in general. You know, we're always trying to figure out, if I have an intuition, what do I do with it? How do I tune into it more? How do I figure out more truth? And many of you know about the thought that Ananda is selling, possibly selling, they're not, haven't even decided, or getting rid of, or transitioning this Ananda Pune retreat. And we've had a lot of people give their opinions about it, and it's fine, you know, it's in the stages of people giving opinions and discussing it. What I know for myself is Jaya and Jyotish have been meditating for over 50 years, and throw in Devi Ji also, and Dhyana Ji also. I trust their decision-making skills, and that people have pursued and tried in strong perseverance, caring about truth the whole time with this retreat over the years. And some red flags have come up before, obstacles have come up, they've tried to plow through them, but it never resolved. And so when you have years of difficulty over time, and that builds up, and the people who are most intimately involved say, please help us relook at this. The ones who have dedicated their lives to making it work and have all their willpower behind it to make it work, if they're also saying, let's think about it, then that's really what's going on. And so what we can do, because most people in this room, many people who are new, have not had the years of watching what's been going on with that retreat, or watching how the people there have had to deal with the certain obstacles happen. And so we may feel, but wait, we need to have a retreat. We need to have a retreat. But just remember, this is also part of spiritual community, is learning to realize that we're all friends, that we're all on the same page in terms of wanting truth, wanting to learn how to trust each other. And, it doesn't mean unconditional trust. It doesn't mean just being a yes person at all. But if someone has an opinion about it, then present it calmly. And, especially in this situation, a lot of people have had ideas. All the things we've heard so far were tried years ago, and over again. Not like, oh yeah, we tried that, never mind. Not like that. People tried. It's one of those things. We tried, and competent people tried. Because, look, it was inspiration that started it. And so what's going on? Now, like I said, no decisions have been made. It's just in the thinking about it stage. And that's why we wanted everyone here to know about that. We didn't want just the final decision, just announce it. There you go, that's the final decision. Don't say anything, please. Like it or lump it. And that's not the way of Ananda. Ananda you can have intelligent discussion at Ananda. There doesn't have to be squelching and that kind of thing. But on the other hand also, Swamiji laid out rules for, I wanted to tell one other story before that. And I know we're running out of time. Is I learned a very important lesson in the engineering world about when it's time to change directions, and this whole pushing forward versus assessing. And I was working at a company that did military spec type work. So we were dealing with microamps instead of milliamps, and these are 10 to the minus sixth amps. Anyway, if you're not an engineer, you're not going to understand, but current. Very, very tiny currents we were dealing with in terms of our specifications, and they did a lot of space stuff. It was stuff that went to NASA and things like that. So we had designed a circuit board, which was just a what's it called when it's pre-production? A prototype. Thank you. It's been a long time. and so we had a prototype board that we had laid out. But it was having a lot of difficulties. We weren't getting the accuracy we wanted off of it. And we were analyzing every node, if you know what that means, or junction, all that. We're analyzing everything in it with these things called spectrum analyzers that can tell you if you desire one frequency, you can see that, but then if all these other bad and wrong frequencies are on it, you see all those also on the analyzer, and we didn't want these, we just wanted, and so all sorts of things, and because of it, the frequency it was running at, we were getting, all sorts of different other things we just didn't want to know, that just kind of, if it were in the commercial world, it would have been like A1 perfect, but it wasn't. It was for the space world, and so it had to be even more perfect. So we worked, I remember putting in weekends, because there was a deadline, of course, like 16-hour, 20-hour days, on the weekends also, throughout the week, just banging our heads against the wall. Let's try this, let's try that, another capacitor here, another capacitor there. All these things to just try and help the prototype out. Then finally, a senior engineer came around who was also getting involved. So he got involved also. And it wasn't that we were junior idiot engineers, but we had not put the accelerometers and gyroscopes on Apollo whatever. These guys had. So he came around, and he also banged his head against the wall for a while on this, and finally said, you know what? Okay, yes, we have a deadline, and yes, it would have been great to have this board work, but we just have to start over because there's some basic issues we've learned now that make us have to just redesign this, and it's going to delay things, but we have to do it. So it was redesigned, boom, it worked right away. And when you have a prototype that works, it means you can go straight to the final design, because the final design was on a little tiny substrate of 15 layers of circuit board, ceramic circuit board, that was going to go on some, NASA thing. And so that became successful too. That first little design worked perfectly also. So getting the prototype right really was important, but also being willing to say, okay, we've banged our head against the wall long enough. Scrap it, take the 2-week hit or 1-month hit, whatever it was, because you don't know if you're redesigning whether it's going to work, and go for it. So we had to. And yes, it was a failure on one level, but we learned a lot when we were trying to troubleshoot. And so anyway, it was a very important lesson in terms of you're moving this direction and you're really trying to force it, and you really want it, and you put in, the 20 hours a day for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it still isn't working. And so sometimes you have to just try. And so from that experience, I kind of understand a little bit more what they're dealing with at the retreat, because I know those people, and I know also, like I said, I trust that decisions are being made calmly. I also trust that people aren't passively giving up. That's the other thing. I've never seen very many people passively give up on something, meaning, I tried a little bit, but I don't feel like doing it anymore. And so very often when we have the ideas, but if they just did this, and they just did that, and they just did this, it's kind of telling them, you didn't really try hard enough, that kind of thing. And so that's why we asked to send our prayers to this and send our prayers to people? Sure. If there's some like really great idea that hasn't been thought of, yeah, bring it up. This is the time to discuss. But, you know, the other thing too is it's easy to get attached to a form. You know, it's like, but I really like that retreat. I really love the trees and the hills and the everything. But those of us who visit don't get to see behind the scenes. You know, and even though it feels idyllic when we're there, there's some behind the scenes stuff going on, that challenges and stuff we don't know about. So I wanted to just kind of bring that up and discuss. And of course, you all can talk more. But, you know, once the decision is made, and I wanted to talk about this, Swamiji talks about loyalty. And Master talked about loyalty a lot. Master himself was stabbed in the back a number of times. And he said treachery is the number one, how did he put it? Number one sin or number one fault. Let's say that. Treachery is the number one fault that can be done on the spiritual path. And you say, you know, why is that? Well, if you translate it to treachery against the guru or treachery against God, that kind of explains what that means. And then that gets, again, filtered down to treachery against your fellow guru bhais, or treachery against your boss, or treachery against your company or your country even. But when we turn our back on our guru, and I mean the guru that was assigned to us, and when we turn our back on the guru out of ignorance, it is a treacherous move. When we become critical of the guru, Swamiji said something about knowing he had to be reincarnated this life because of a deeply doubting his guru in the life before. And so there's a thing about loyalty. Now, you read, I mean, Swami obviously learned the lesson well. Here he is even writing, look, when the master says something, we don't say, yeah, I guess gravity exists, but you know, I'm not sure if that's really a valid thing, you know. It's kind of like saying that about reincarnation. Not that I want to like jam reincarnation if you don't believe it, but it's kind of like, well, disbelieve it all you want. But it is something that happens. And the mind, the logical mind, can easily argue for what the heart desires. But I wanted to read this thing that Swamiji wrote about spiritual community and loyalty. And he talks a lot about, you know, he wrote Art of Supportive Leadership, and he wrote Material Success Through Yoga Principles. And we just got the Material Success Through Yoga Principles. It's actually a thick business course, and we used to go out and train people with it. And Art of Supportive Leadership is the same. And Swamiji talks about how how employers should be, but also how employees could be also, and then that translates into guru bhais getting along as well. And that once a decision is made, there's a time during a decision-making time when input is great, calm input is good. But then once the decision has been taken, then the supportive thing to do is to support that decision, even if it wasn't your preference. You know what I mean? And you find this, you know, all the time, where people will hold on to, yeah, but they made that one decision a long time ago and I disagreed with it. And you can see how it becomes like a little poison in the heart. And it's especially hard if it happened to us. Like we were, you know, out of the way, bucko. And so it's like, you know, someone gets pushed out of the way or something, and then we really remember that, and then there can be a vindictiveness that comes from that, or a desire to kind of speak negatively a lot, or participate in gossip, or try and like rally the troops against everybody or something like that. But here's something Swamiji wrote about loyalty on the spiritual path. He wrote, loyalty, Paramahansa Yogananda often said, is the first law of God. He spoke strongly concerning the opposite quality to loyalty. Treachery, he told us, his disciples, is the greatest sin before God. For moral sins are committed in weakness under the influence of past habit, but treachery is deliberate. So he said, moral sins are committed in weakness. So that's like, oh, I really want this. I shouldn't do it. I did it. You know, that kind of a thing. But treachery is deliberate. Let every member take his words on this subject to heart and meditate on how they may apply to his life in all its aspects. For both loyalty and treachery have their reality first, not in action, but in mind. It is not disloyal to disagree. It is disloyal, however, to take one's disagreement to those who are not in a position to influence matters for the better, or who cannot at least help one to achieve greater clarity on the subject. See, that's about talking to your small little group of friends and saying, we hate this, we hate this, we hate this, and then one person goes to the person and says, I really hate this, and all my friends think the same too. But that happens also. It is not necessarily a sign of loyalty, on the other hand, merely to agree. If, for example, one's agreement is what he inwardly perceives as an error. It is a sign of loyalty, however, to support one's spiritual family, regardless of one's disagreement with some of its directions, provided directions constitute no major threat to what should always be the member's highest loyalty, his commitment to God. And this is where we can compare our true desire for God to our seemingly life-threatening decision about what's being given for lunch today. You know, it is not loyal in the name of fairness and objectivity to withhold support from community decisions once these decisions have been agreed upon. Nor is it loyal in the name of open-mindedness to hold oneself aloof in such matters, as if claiming to represent some higher wisdom that is not being accepted. Perfection cannot be achieved here on earth. Is it not wrong, then, to make such minor imperfections as one may find or imagine one has found in his chosen spiritual family his excuse for withholding mental support? You know, Swamiji once said, you know, he would take years to finally have an idea that he had an intuition about to be manifested. I mean, imagine a genius and a high spiritual master having to deal with a bunch of imperfect people in a community. You know, it's not just like he just shows up on Sundays and gives a little speech and people go off. It was like living with each other day in, day out, having to deal with the little squabbles that can happen. I mean, talk about immense patience. Does one, for instance, for the imperfections that he may observe in his own mother, hold himself aloof from her? She is his mother, after all, her human shortcomings notwithstanding. When there is love, a person's deepest awareness will always be of the causes for unity, not for disunity. Wherever they may go, members, wherever they may go, should see themselves as channels of God and of the ray of the divine light that is expressed through Ananda. They should behave themselves accordingly, joyfully, of course, but never with abandon, and always with God remembrance. They ought to strive consciously to project their inner light, so that that light, which is to say God's light through them, may touch on some level everyone they meet. And this is the beauty of what Swamiji could do, because he could reach into each one of our souls and bring up the highest aspiration. And that's why Ananda has worked all these years, is because there's this expectation that people are acting from their highest good. And rather than, we're used to in the world of kind of saying that person's corrupt, and that person lies all the time, and that person, oh my God. But at Ananda, what's very helpful is try to see the soul in each other. Try to see the soul aspirations in each other. Try to see the highest in each other. And when we do that, we help each other live in our highest. You know, and when someone makes a mistake, I mean, we have seen mistakes, big time mistakes over the years. But what's really beautiful, if someone makes a mistake but doesn't go and hide in shame and end up leaving, if instead they just say, okay, you know, I made a mistake, and I'm not going to define myself by the mistake, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's amazing to see how their Guru Bhais just move forward with it all. And don't, you know, X them out and say, you know, put the big scarlet letter on them or whatever. That's the person who, and then make sure everybody else who's new that comes in knows that that's the person, you know, that kind of a thing. It's natural human nature to kind of sink that way. This is the whole energy up the spine versus energy down the spine. It's only the natural fight between energy up and energy down that makes us be tired and take the energy down route. And with the energy down route, it's the, you know, stuff. But with the energy up route, it's like, hello, soul. Hello, great souls. Swamiji would often say, hello, great souls, you know, and it was an affirmation. And people would kind of sit up straighter and, hello, Swamiji, you know, because it's like, yes, we do see the highest in each other. And yes, we're all striving, and we want so badly to have our mistakes forgotten. And we want so badly to just be seen in our most truest desires in the way they are. And so let's do that for each other, and let's support each other as best we can. And, you know, this whole Pune thing, it's a great learning experience, because through this experience you'll get to see the decision making that's happening. And by being able to observe that and see that, you might gain a little more trust for what is actually happening in it. By having uplifting discussions with others, trust is formed, friendship is formed. Not a personal friendship necessarily where, you know, my long-lost sister from 10 lifetimes ago, I've just missed you so much. You know, instead it's just we all have a spiritual connection. We've most likely all been together before. We're just starting it back up again. And so, but it takes time. It takes time to build that trust. It takes time to build community. And so it's just very much a pleasure to be here. And I remember when I was a college student, I got lost for quite a while in Western philosophy. And, you know, the whole thought that truth is relative. So that's your truth, and that's your truth, and that's your fine. You believe in God, that's your truth. You know, this kind of thing. I was agnostic. I wasn't an atheist. But it made me so depressed to believe that truth was relative. And I mean, the higher truths were relative. And that's just not it. So when I found this path and I got in touch with Swamiji and Master and all of our gurus here, what a relief, you know, to just have the whole truth is truth. And let's aim for that.